Hello all, and welcome to the very beginning stages of our journey through the animal kingdom. We start our journey at the bottom with the lower animals. As you can see, this comical representation of our good friend SpongeBob SquarePants and his friends. Okay, so we're going to start with Porifera, then we'll talk about Cnidaria, and then our mollusks. So we have mollusks, Porifera, Cnidaria, and another mollusk. Lower animals are the first members of the kingdom Animalia. Now, the true definition of any animal is that they are multicellular, eukaryotic, heterotroph with no cell wall at all. So multicellular means more than one cell. Eukaryotic, hopefully you remember that U has nu, so U has nu or nucleus. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. Heterotroph. Heterotroph means they must eat food. Okay? So they are heterotrophs. They must eat food, and they have no cell wall. Cell walls belong in the kingdom of Plantae. Invertebrates are animals that do not have a backbone. So in, Latin root for not, no, in, invertebrates, no backbone. Okay? So our main three phylums, because remember our organization, we go domains, kingdom, and then phylums. One day I will learn to spell. Phylums. Okay, so domain, kingdoms, phylums. So Porifera, or sponges, belong in domain Eukarya, because they are eukaryotes. Kingdom, Animalia, phylum, Porifera. These are our sponges. Then we'll talk about our phylum Cnidaria, jellyfish, corals, and anemones. And on our next lecture, we will talk about mollusca, which are squids, clams, and snails. So this lecture is going to focus all on these guys, Poriferas and Cnidarians. So let's dive in. Pun intended. This is a cladogram. You guys should be well aware of what a cladogram is now and how we separate the different clades or the different leaves of a cladogram. And this big lightning bolt looking thing here, this deal, is just going to separate protists from animals. Okay, and we are going to be focusing all on animals going forward. So we start with Porifera. This is our outgroup. Porifera. Okay, and again, those are sponges. They do not have tissues. So the big separation between all other animals and sponges is tissues and symmetry, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. So the next break-off point would be Cnidaria, and those are going to be your anemones, your corals, and your jellyfish. The next advancement to get to mollusca are going to be true organs and bilateral symmetry. So again, we'll talk about all these in greater depth, but I wanted to show you what it looked like on a cladogram. So first things first, what are animals versus animal-like protists? Well, SpongeBob here actually is an animal. He belongs to the phylum Porifera. And then plankton is a representative of an animal-like protist. Now, not all planktons are animal-like protists. We actually have several kinds of things you would classify as plankton. You have phytoplankton, which are more related to plants, algae, and the like, because they actually do photosynthesis. They have chloroplasts. They generate oxygen for us. In fact, those phytoplankton generate more oxygen for us to breathe than all of the land, plants, and trees do. So just to give you, how important those phytoplankton are, animal-like protists would be lumped into a group called zooplankton. And in addition to the animal-like protists or protozoans that belong in zooplankton, you would also have things like very small shrimp like krill. Okay, so some of the major differences between animals and animal-like protists are animals are multicellular, animal-like protists are unicellular, so one cell, many cells. Animals are free living, They gather their own food, they consume it. Animal-like protists, a lot of them are parasitic, but not all of them. Okay? Animals, especially sponges, do live in water, but some animals live on land. Animal-like protists are completely water-based. They must live in water, otherwise they cannot support life on land. So those are the three main differences between animals and animal-like protists. So how do we classify invertebrates? Well, there's a few different big questions we ask whenever we're talking about invertebrate classification. The first one is, how do they eat? Second is, how do they reproduce? Third, what is their body plan? So this refers back to symmetry. And this again for organization purposes. And are there any special structures that go along with that body plan? Is there any body covering? And how do they care for their young, if at all? So these are ways that we classify invertebrates. So let's look closely now at the phylum Porifera, otherwise known as sponges. They are what we know currently with our scientific reasoning and research have deciphered that sponges are the very first animals. They are around 650 to 760 million years old. They've been around a long, long time, and they've seen an awful lot. Okay? The name Porifera means pore-bearing. Pores, another way to say that, are holes. Just like your face has pores in them, and your skin has pores in them, in between the little individual cells here, they are porous. They have holes. And the holes are very important because it allows water to go in to the sponge. Without these holes, water cannot get into the sponge, and then the collar cells and little flagella could not have water pass through these little nets and get food for individual collar cells. Okay? So, the name Porifera means pore-bearing, holes. There are no true tissues. Remember, tissues, we have an organization for living things. You first start with a cell. That is the smallest unit of life. Anything smaller than that cannot be considered living. Tissues are the next step up, and that just means that a bunch of cells are next to each other. Then you have tissue systems, then you have organs, then you have organ systems, and finally an organism. Okay? So cells and then tissues. Remember, sponges do not have true tissues. So in essence, sponges are just a bunch of individual cells that live next to each other. They don't interact as tissues. Okay? Pore cells contain small, sharp structures for support called spicules, and you can see them here. They look like little diamonds, and they are unique to each sponge, kind of like a sponge's fingerprints. All right? And then this guy, what's in this black rectangle here, is called a collar cell. They contain flagella, which moves around, and they allow water to kind of flow through this webbing, and that captures the food particles as they go through the sponge. Water flow in a sponge goes with these green bluish arrows. It goes in through the sponge and out through the osculum or opening of the sponge. Okay? As water gets pumped in and through it, this flagella create that current, and these little net-like organs, or part of the collar cell, gathers up these little particles of food. And it can be anything from very small algae to animal-like protists, even algae that we would consider or relate to as red tide. Okay? Red tide harms fish because fish have nerve cells and tissues. Sponges do not have tissues, so as water flows through them and they eat that red tide algae, there are no nerves for the algae to damage. Okay, that is why they can eat red tide, and they are what we like to call filter feeders, and that word's down here, and they provide an invaluable service for our oceans. And what they do is they clean, just like any other filter does, they clean all the impurities out of the oceans. So if you have a Brita water pitcher and you fill it with water, and then that charcoal filter that is in the pitcher, that filters out a lot of the big bad stuff you don't want to drink in your water. That's why we put it through the filter. Well, sponges are nature's version of that filter. Okay? In the beginnings, we have the first stages of life for animals, so our sponges. Their body plan is no symmetry. there isn't a way to cut it in half. There's no way to cut this in half and have two sides equal. Okay? And I'm not sure if you guys have been introduced to symmetry or not, but symmetry is just a way to cut something in half equally. So we'll say it in equal halves. Okay, so symmetry is a way to cut something into an equal half. So if I cut you down the vertical middle, so topping from your head and going all the way down to your feet, your left side is going to be virtually identical to your right side. Now you are what are called bilaterally symmetric. Sponges, on the other hand, are not. They have no symmetry. They are asymmetrical, and again, a, just like the prefix in, means not or no. So not or no. The organizations, they just have cells, no tissues, and they can reproduce sexually or asexually by a process called budding. So remember, if sponges reproduce asexually, it's by a process called budding, and this you can see is a larvae of a sponge, or they can reproduce sexually by producing gametes and then jettisoning those gametes into the ocean and letting fate decide, or the ocean currents decide, who gets mated and who does not. Now, for an animal to be an animal, at some point in their life, they must move. That is something that we haven't talked about yet, but that is a requirement to be an animal. Sponges, during their adulthood, there's a really bad drawing of a sponge, are what are called sessile. They don't move. So how can these guys possibly be considered animals if they never move? Well, they do. They move during their larvae stage, or juvenile stage. Okay? So in essence, this is a picture of a larvae of a sponge, and you can see that they have all these little flagellas, okay, that eventually will turn into collar cells, and those flagellas will go internal to create the water flow so that they can eat. But while they're larvae, they are used for locomotion. So scientists believe that sponges are actually more animal-like as larvae, young sponges, as they are when they are adults. Okay? So to be an animal, you must move at some point. And sponges move when they're babies, called larvae. They are sessile, or no movement, when they are adults. They attach themselves to a rock face or a coral bed or the sea floor. Now moving on to Cnidarians. Cnidarians all have this, and that's what makes the ouchies whenever you get stung by a jellyfish, okay, or coral, or anemones. They all have these things called stinging cells, affectionately known as nematocysts. So these are all the same thing. Nematocysts are stinging cells, and this little cnidocyl acts as a trigger. So if something touches that trigger, the harpoon is going to come out really, really fast, inject into whatever it was, inject some venom and or toxins, and cause bad things to happen. And in humans, you get a bad rash. In some cases, you can die. So generally, you're going to have a rough day, depending on what species stings you. If you're a fish, your day is going to probably be worse. More than likely, you are going to die because some jellyfish feed off of that. Okay? There are two main body types for Cnidarians. Remember, this is one of the things that we have to learn about classifications of invertebrates. We have two types. We have polyps, which look like these guys, or medusa, which look like these guys. And in some cases, they flip during their life cycle, okay? But for the most part, our polyps are going to be things like anemones and corals, and medusa are going to be things like jellyfish. Okay? And the polyp, they really are just, opposites of each other. Polyp, you have the tentacles on the top and the body's on the bottom. In medusa, you have the body on the top and the tentacles on the bottom. And these nematocysts are always in the tentacles. Okay? So there are three classes of Cnidaria. You have the jellyfish, which are these guys. You have coral, which are those guys. And you have anemones, which can also be classified mostly as polyps. the major advancements in Cnidaria over sponges or Porifera are in their body plan and their tissues. Okay? The body plan is radial. What that means, and here's a picture of radial symmetry here. What that means is, let me get rid of this guy, is if I draw a circle, and again that looks more like an oval because I'm a terrible artist, but what I can do is I can draw a line at any point through the midpoint or center of the organism and get equal halves. Remember, symmetry means I can cut it in half and get an equal representation on the left and right of it. So a radially symmetrical organism means I can cut it from the top to the bottom on any direction and get an equal half. So that is what radial means. Radial, think radius in the circle. Okay, so radius is from central point to the second, or to the outermost rim. Yeah, math teachers are going to love that one, aren't they? So radial symmetry. They have true tissues. So true tissues where sponges did not have tissues. They have muscles, first animal group to move on their own in adulthood. Before that, they just moved in a larvae stage. They do have a nerve net, so nerves. And it's all reflex action. They can sense predators, and they do produce sexually. Okay, so these guys only produce sexually. They have gametes, and they inject them into the open water, and then an egg finds a sperm, and they fertilize, and then they get a little larvae anemone, or a larvae coral, or a larvae jellyfish, and then they make a big jellyfish. Aww. So that's reproduction in Cnidarians. Sexual reproduction, only in Cnidarians. Okay, they have nerve nets, muscles, true tissues, and radial symmetry. And this is just some examples of how varied a jellyfish can be. This is the biggest jellyfish on the planet, called a lion's mane jellyfish, and this is an Arachangi. He's a tiny little guy that can cause that much damage. I would be much more concerned about this little dude who can kill people versus this giant thing that looks a lot scarier. Okay? And that is it for your Porifera and Cnidaria lecture. Don't forget about your video secret number, which is 76. 76 is your video secret number, and answer your questions, and I will see you in class. Thanks so much.